The way is in training. These 4 words, written by Miyamoto Musashi in 1645, contain the secret to achieving enlightenment without ever setting foot in a temple or following a single religious doctrine. While millions seek spiritual awakening through prayer, meditation retreats, and ancient texts, history's greatest swordsman found a different path, one carved not through devotion to gods, but through relentless dedication to mastery itself. But here's what makes this extraordinary. Musashi didn't just stumble upon enlightenment. He systematically developed a method so powerful that it transformed him from a wild, reckless teenager into the most feared and respected warrior in Japan. More importantly, he documented this method in such detail that you can follow the same path today, regardless of whether you've ever held a sword or stepped into a dojo. Miyamoto Musashi lived in 17th century Japan, an era where samurai culture and Buddhist philosophy were deeply intertwined. Zen monasteries dotted the landscape. Meditation was part of warrior training. The concept of karma governed daily life. Yet this legendary warrior who fought over 60 duels and never lost, single one discovered something that challenged everything his culture believed about spiritual development. Musashi realized that enlightenment isn't reserved for monks or mystics. It's not something you achieve by withdrawing from the world or following prescribed rituals. Instead, it's available to anyone willing to pursue excellence with such intensity that the boundary between self and skill dissolves entirely. He found that the deepest spiritual truths emerge not from contemplating the divine, but from engaging so completely with reality that you transcend ordinary consciousness through extraordinary commitment. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a programmer who codes so intensively that you enter a flow state where time disappears. Your fingers move without conscious thought, and you become one with the code itself. In that moment, you're not thinking about programming, you are programming. The boundaries between you and your work dissolve. Now, imagine sustaining that state not for hours, but for decades, across every aspect of your existence. That's the path Musashi walked, the one you can walk to.
But why should you care about a 400-year-old samurai's approach to enlightenment?
Because in our modern world, we're facing the same fundamental challenge Musashi faced: how to find meaning, purpose, and transcendence in a chaotic, violent, and uncertain environment. Musashi lived through Japan's most turbulent period. End of the Sengoku era, where constant warfare had torn the country apart for over a century. You live in a world of information overload, social media pressure, economic uncertainty, and global instability. The contexts are different, but the need for inner clarity, unshakable focus, and authentic purpose remains the same. Discover the complete system that guided Musashi to enlightenment through pure discipline and self-mastery. These aren't religious teachings or mystical concepts, but practical methods you can apply to your own life, whether you're building a business, mastering a skill, raising a family, or simply seeking deeper meaning in your daily existence. The end of this exploration, you'll understand why Musashi's path might be more relevant to your modern challenges than any ancient spiritual tradition. Musashi understood that true enlightenment comes not from abandoning the world, but from engaging with it so completely that you transcend ordinary consciousness through extraordinary commitment. Let's begin with his first revolutionary insight. The first principle Musashi discovered was what he called becoming one with the sword. But this wasn't about weapons. It was about the complete integration of mind, body, and purpose. How radical this was, you need to know how Musashi started his journey. At age 13, Musashi killed his first man in a duel. He was essentially a delinquent, angry, undisciplined, and driven by raw aggression. He won his early fights through natural talent and sheer ferocity. But as he matured and faced increasingly skilled opponents, he realized that victory came not from force, but from becoming so unified with his practice that his actions flowed from a place deeper than conscious thought. This transformation didn't happen overnight. For decades, Musashi trained with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He would practice sword forms for 12 hours a day, studying not just the mechanics of each movement, but the psychological states that produce different results. He noticed that when he was thinking about technique during a fight, he was slower. He was worried about winning or losing, he made mistakes. But when he could quiet his mind and let his body respond from pure training, he became unstoppable. But here's where Musashi's insight becomes relevant to your life. He didn't limit this principle to swordsmanship. He applied the same integration to everything he touched: painting, sculpture, writing, and strategy. He didn't compartmentalize his life into separate skills. Instead, he saw each discipline as another path toward the same destination: complete mastery of self. Musashi spent years learning to paint with the same intensity he brought to swordsmanship. He didn't paint as a hobby or relaxation. He painted as a warrior. He studied how different brushstrokes created different emotional responses. He practiced until he could capture the essence of a bird in flight with 3 quick strokes. He understood that the same mental state that made him invincible with a sword would make him exceptional with a brush. This is profoundly different from how most people approach skill development. We tend to think of our abilities as separate compartments: our work skills, our creative pursuits, our physical fitness, our relationships. But Musashi discovered that excellence is a way of being, not a collection of separate competencies. The focus, dedication, and presence you bring to one area of your life inevitably affects every other area. Here's how you can apply this today. Choose one area of your life where you want to excel, and commit to practicing it with the same intensity Musashi brought to swordsmanship. But here's the crucial part: don't just practice the external mechanics. Study the internal states that produce your best performance. If you're an entrepreneur, don't just work on your business, become your business. Study every aspect from marketing psychology to financial modeling until you can feel market shifts in your bones. But more importantly, pay attention to your mental state during your most productive hours. What thoughts support your best decision-making? What emotional states help you see opportunities others miss? When you're in flow, what's happening in your mind and body? If you're learning a language, don't just memorize vocabulary. Immerse yourself so completely that you begin to think in that language. But also study the psychological barriers that prevent fluency. What fears make you hesitate to speak? Beliefs about yourself limit your progress. How does your self-image change when you're communicating in a different language? If you're developing a creative skill like writing or music, don't just practice the technical aspects, cultivate the mental states that produce your most authentic expression. What conditions allow your creativity to flow freely? What internal critics need to be silenced? How does your relationship with uncertainty affect your willingness to experiment? The key is integration, not accumulation. Musashi didn't become enlightened by collecting more skills. He became enlightened by bringing the same quality of attention to everything he did. He discovered that the path to mastery isn't about becoming different people in different contexts, but about becoming more completely yourself in every context. This requires a level of self-awareness that most people never develop. You need to become a scientist of your own consciousness, studying the conditions that produce your peak performance and the patterns that sabotage your progress. You need to treat your inner life with the same precision Musashi brought to sword technique. When you stop treating your skills as separate from yourself and start seeing them as expressions of your deepest nature, you begin to touch the same enlightenment Musashi found. You realize that mastery isn't about perfecting external techniques, it's about removing the internal obstacles that prevent your natural excellence from emerging. The second principle was emptying the mind of attachment. Musashi wrote, "Do not regret what you have done." This wasn't about being reckless or careless, it was about achieving a state of complete presence where past victories and failures couldn't cloud current judgment. To understand why this was so crucial, imagine what it was like to fight a duel. In Musashi's era, you're facing an opponent who has trained for decades. One mistake means death. There's no referee, no second chances, no timeouts. In this environment, a samurai who celebrated his last successful strike would die from the next one. A warrior haunted by previous defeats would hesitate at the crucial moment. Musashi learned to fight and live in a state of what he called no mind, where his responses came from pure training rather than emotional baggage. He could strike down an opponent and immediately shift to the next threat without a moment's pause for pride or relief. This wasn't coldness. It was the warmest possible engagement with reality as it actually is, rather than as he wished it to be. But Musashi took this principle far beyond combat, applied it to every aspect of his life. He painted, he didn't carry the success or failure of his previous painting into the current brushstroke. When he wrote, he didn't let yesterday's insights interfere with today's fresh observations. When he taught students, he met each person exactly where they were, without the filter of his expectations based on other students. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of Musashi's path for modern people. We live in a culture that constantly reinforces attachment to our achievements, our failures, our identities, our plans. Social media amplifies this by creating permanent records of our past selves. We're encouraged to build personal brands, to be consistent, to have clear narratives about who we are and what we've accomplished. But Musashi discovered that this attachment to past versions of ourselves is the primary obstacle to growth. Every time you approach a new challenge carrying the weight of your previous experiences, you're not fully available to what's happening now. You're fighting with yesterday's mind against today's reality. You face the same challenge every day, just in different clothing. When you're in a difficult conversation with your boss, your effectiveness depends on responding to what they're actually saying, not what you fear they might mean based on last month's performance review. When you're trying to solve a complex problem, your breakthrough comes from seeing the situation clearly, not through the lens of your previous successes or failures. When you're learning a new skill, your progress depends on your willingness to be bad at it without carrying the story of being bad into the next practice session. When you're building a relationship, your connection depends on meeting the other person as they are today, not as they were yesterday or as you hope they'll be tomorrow. This doesn't mean ignoring the lessons of experience. Musashi wasn't advocating for amnesia. Instead, he was pointing to a different relationship with memory one, where past experiences inform your judgment without controlling your perception. You can remember that certain approaches didn't work in the past without being paralyzed by fear of repeating those mistakes. You can acknowledge your accomplishments without being limited by the need to maintain the identity of someone who accomplishes such things. Practice this. At the end of each day, mentally release both your victories and your defeats. Don't celebrate or mourn, simply acknowledge what happened and let it go. This isn't about being unemotional. It's about being free to respond to tomorrow's challenges with your full intelligence rather than yesterday's conditioning. But go deeper than this daily practice. Throughout your day, notice when attachment to past outcomes is affecting your current performance. Are you hesitating to take a risk because you remember a previous failure? Are you repeating a strategy because it worked once before, even though the circumstances have changed? Are you trying to maintain an image of yourself that's based on outdated achievements? The goal isn't to become detached from outcomes, it's to become more attached to the process. Musashi cared deeply about excellence, but he didn't cling to any particular expression of that excellence. He was willing to be wrong, to start over, to look foolish in service of continuous improvement. True enlightenment isn't about feeling good about yourself, it's about being completely available to what's happening now. When you can meet each moment without the armor of your past successes or the weight of your previous failures, you discover a quality of presence that transforms everything you touch. The third principle was finding the way in ordinary action. Most people think enlightenment requires extraordinary experiences, revelations, or mystical states. But Musashi discovered something different. The deepest wisdom comes from bringing complete attention to mundane activities. He wrote, "In strategy, it is important to treat training as part of normal life and normal life as part of training." This wasn't just a philosophical statement. It was a practical method for continuous development. Musashi understood that the quality of consciousness you bring to small things determines the quality of consciousness available to you in crucial moments. This meant that walking, eating, sleeping, and every daily routine became opportunities for cultivation. When Musashi swept his floor, he wasn't just cleaning, he was practicing the same focused attention he brought to swordplay. He studied how different movements affected his balance, He noticed how his breathing changed with different rhythms of sweeping. He observed how his mental state influenced the efficiency of his actions. When he ate, he wasn't just consuming food. Was studying the relationship between nourishment and performance. He paid attention to how different foods affected his energy levels, his mental clarity, and his emotional stability. He ate with the same precision he brought to sword technique, treating each meal as an opportunity to optimize his physical and mental condition. When he walked, he wasn't just moving from one place to another, he was cultivating awareness of his environment and his own internal state. He studied how his footsteps affected his breathing, how his posture influenced his confidence, how his pace of movement reflected his mental rhythm. This approach was revolutionary because it dissolved the artificial separation between spiritual practice and daily life. Instead of setting aside special times for meditation or enlightenment, Musashi made every moment an opportunity for awakening. He didn't need to escape to a monastery because he had transformed ordinary life into a monastery. This is perhaps the most practical insight for modern life. You don't need to escape to a retreat center or wait for weekend workshops to begin. Your transformation, the spreadsheet you're working on, the email you're writing, the conversation you're having with your child, the drive to work, the preparation of dinner, these are your dojo. The question isn't whether you have time for spiritual practice. It's whether you're willing to bring spiritual intensity to the time you already have. But here's what most people miss. Bringing complete attention to ordinary activities isn't about making them special or meaningful. It's about discovering the extraordinary nature of what's already happening. When you truly pay attention to any activity, you discover layers of complexity, beauty, and opportunity that were invisible when you were doing it on autopilot. Try this. Pick one routine activity you do every day: brewing coffee, walking to work, washing dishes. For the next week, do it with the same focus Musashi brought to sword training. Notice every detail, every sensation, every subtle variation. Don't try to make it special or meaningful. Just be completely present with it. You're brewing coffee. Pay attention to the sound of the water heating, the aroma as it intensifies, the precise moment when the color changes. Notice how your body responds to the ritual, how your mind settles into the familiar rhythm. Observe how rushing through the process affects the quality of both the coffee and your state of mind. When you're walking, feel the ground beneath your feet, the air on your skin, the rhythm of your breathing. Notice how your gait changes with your mood, how your posture affects your perception of your environment. Study the relationship between your internal state and your external movement. When you're washing dishes, pay attention to the temperature of the water, the texture of different surfaces, the efficiency of your movements. Notice how your mind wanders and how you can bring it back to the task. Observe how the simple act of cleaning can become a form of meditation. But don't stop with solo activities. Apply this same quality of attention to your interactions with others. When you're talking to your partner, be completely present with their words, their tone, their body language. When you're playing with your children, let yourself be fully absorbed in their world. When you're in a business meeting, listen with the same intensity Musashi brought to studying his opponents. The key is consistency. Musashi didn't practice intense presence occasionally, he made it his default mode of operation. He understood that consciousness is like a muscle. It grows stronger with regular use and atrophies with neglect. Moment you spend fully present is training for the moments when presence is most crucial. This is why Musashi could remain calm in life or death situations. He had practiced presence so thoroughly in ordinary moments that it had become his natural state. He didn't need to summon special focus for important occasions, because he had already cultivated that focus through thousands of mundane moments. When ordinary actions become opportunities for mastery, your entire life becomes a path to enlightenment. You realize that the sacred isn't somewhere else, it's hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered through the simple act of paying attention. The fourth principle was death as the ultimate teacher. Musashi lived with the constant awareness that any duel could be his last. But rather than creating anxiety, this awareness became the source of his greatest freedom. In his famous work, The Book of Five Rings, Musashi wrote, Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. This wasn't about self-deprecation. It was about recognizing that your ego's concerns are temporary, while your actions can create something lasting. When you're no longer attached to protecting your self-image, you can take risks, make mistakes, and grow in ways that would be impossible if you were constantly defending your reputation. But Musashi's relationship with death went deeper than accepting physical mortality. He understood that everything is constantly dying and being reborn. The person you were yesterday is gone. The version of yourself you'll be next year doesn't exist yet. In each moment, you have the opportunity to die to old patterns and be reborn into new possibilities. This perspective transformed how Musashi approached challenges. Instead of seeing failure as a threat to his identity, he saw it as information about what needed to die within him. Every defeat revealed an attachment that was limiting his growth. Every mistake pointed to a pattern that needed to be transformed. Every setback became an opportunity to let go of something that was no longer serving him. Consider how Musashi handled his most famous duel, the fight with Sasaki Kajiro on Ganru Island. Kajiro was known for his incredibly long sword and his lightning-fast technique. By conventional logic, Musashi should have been terrified. Instead, he arrived late to the duel, carved a wooden sword from an oar on the boat ride over, and defeated Kajiro with a single strike. What made this possible wasn't just technical skill, it was Musashi's complete acceptance of death. He wasn't fighting to preserve his reputation or to prove his superiority. He was simply meeting the moment with total presence, unencumbered by attachment to any particular outcome. This freedom from the fear of death paradoxically made him more alive than his opponent. In modern terms, this means making peace with failure, criticism, and uncertainty. Not because these things don't matter, but because they matter less than the work itself. When you're building something meaningful, whether it's a company, a relationship, or a skill, your willingness to look foolish, to be wrong, to start over, becomes your greatest asset. Think about the areas of your life where you're playing it safe because you're afraid of failure. Maybe you're staying in a job that doesn't fulfill you because you fear the uncertainty of starting over. Maybe you're avoiding difficult conversations because you're afraid of conflict. Maybe you're not pursuing a creative project because you're afraid of criticism. Musashi would say that these fears are keeping you from living fully. They're forms of attachment that prevent you from responding authentically to what the moment requires. Every time you choose safety over growth, you're choosing a kind of death, the death of your potential. But here's the paradox. When you truly accept that everything is temporary, including your current identity, you become free to engage more fully with life. You realize that the worst thing that can happen isn't failure. It's remaining stuck in patterns that prevent you from discovering who you really are. This doesn't mean being reckless or careless. Musashi was incredibly strategic and prepared. But his preparation came from a place of curiosity rather than fear. He studied his opponents not because he was afraid of losing, but because he was fascinated by the challenge of growth. He practiced not because he was worried about his reputation, but because he was committed to excellence. Here's the practice. Once a week, do something that risks minor embarrassment or failure. Take a dance class where you'll look clumsy. Pitch an idea that might be rejected. Have a conversation that might be awkward. Learn a skill where you'll be a beginner. Share your work before you think it's ready, not for the sake of failure, but for the sake of freedom from the fear of failure. Each time you choose growth over safety, you're practicing the same principle that made Musashi invincible. You're dying to the part of yourself that needs to be protected and being reborn into the part of yourself that's capable of authentic expression. But go deeper than occasional risks. Start viewing every challenge as an opportunity to practice dying to old patterns. When you feel frustrated, instead of defending your right to be frustrated, ask what part of you needs to die for this situation. To become workable, when you feel stuck, instead of trying to force your way forward, ask what attachments you need to release to see new possibilities. When you stop protecting your image and start serving your growth, you discover what Musashi knew. Death isn't the opposite of life, it's the force that makes life real. Every moment you're not growing, you're dying. Every moment you're not risking, you're withering. Every moment you're not challenging yourself, you're becoming less than you could be. The fifth principle was continuous adaptation through rigorous self-study. Musashi didn't just practice, he studied his practice. With the intensity of a scientist, he kept detailed records of his techniques, his mental states, and his results. He analyzed every duel, every training session, every moment of success and failure. But this wasn't just intellectual analysis. Musashi understood that true learning happens through what he called body knowledge, understanding that comes from direct experience rather than theoretical study. He didn't just read about swordsmanship, he lived it. He didn't just think about strategy, he embodied it. This meant paying attention to subtleties that others ignored. How did his breathing change when he was nervous? What micro-expressions did opponents display before attacking? How did weather conditions affect his grip? How did his diet influence his reflexes? He studied these details not because he was obsessed with perfection, but because he understood that mastery emerges from the accumulation of precise observations. More importantly, Musashi was willing to abandon techniques that no longer served him. He didn't become attached to particular strategies because they had worked in the past. Instead, he constantly evolved his approach based on new information and changing circumstances. He understood that the path to enlightenment requires continuous death and rebirth, constantly letting go of who you were to become who you need to be. This principle is crucial for modern life because we live in a rapidly changing world. The skills that made you successful 5 years ago might be obsolete today. The strategies that worked in your 20s might be counterproductive in your 40s. The beliefs that served you in one context might limit you in another. Most people respond to change by clinging more tightly to what they know. They try to apply old solutions to new problems. They resist adapting because it requires admitting that their previous approach was incomplete. But Musashi understood that this resistance is the enemy of growth. Instead, he cultivated what we might call beginner's mind, the willingness to approach each situation with fresh eyes, regardless of previous experience. He didn't let his expertise become a prison. He remained curious, experimental, and open to being wrong. Apply this to your own development. What skills do you need to update for the current reality? What beliefs about yourself or your industry are based on outdated information? What strategies are you using simply because they're familiar, not because they're effective? Start treating your life as a laboratory. Keep track of what works and what doesn't. Notice patterns in your behavior and their results. Be willing to experiment with new approaches, even if they feel uncomfortable initially. Most importantly, be willing to abandon methods that no longer serve you, regardless of how much you've invested in them. This requires a level of honesty that most people avoid. It means admitting when you're wrong, acknowledging when you're stuck, and recognizing when you need to change. But this honesty is the foundation of real growth. Without it, you'll keep repeating the same patterns and wondering why you're not getting different results. The sixth principle was teaching as a path to mastery. Later in his life, Musashi began teaching students. But he didn't teach in the traditional way through lectures or demonstrations. Instead, he taught through what he called transmission directly, sharing his state of consciousness with his students. This wasn't mystical or esoteric, it was practical. Musashi understood that true mastery can't be communicated through words alone. It has to be experienced directly. So he created situations where students could discover the same insights he had discovered, but through their own direct experience. This taught Musashi as much as it taught his students. When you try to explain something to someone else, you're forced to understand it more clearly yourself. When you watch others struggle with the same challenges you've overcome, you gain new perspective on your own journey. When you see your knowledge through someone else's eyes, you discover aspects of it that were previously invisible. But teaching isn't just about formal instruction. Every interaction is an opportunity to both learn and teach. When you're collaborating with colleagues, you're both sharing knowledge and acquiring new perspectives. When you're parenting, you're both guiding your children and learning from their fresh way of seeing the world. When you're in a relationship, you're both offering support and receiving insights. Musashi discovered that this reciprocal process accelerates growth for everyone involved. When you're truly present with someone else's learning process, you're reminded of the beginner's mind that's essential for your own continued development. When you're explaining concepts to others, you're forced to clarify your own understanding. When you're supporting someone else's growth, you're practicing the same qualities you need for your own advancement. This principle transforms how you approach all your relationships. Instead of seeing interactions as opportunities to prove your knowledge or get what you need, you start seeing them as opportunities for mutual development. You become genuinely curious about other people's perspectives, not just because you want to be polite, but because you recognize that their unique viewpoint might contain insights you've missed. The seventh and final principle was integration through artistic expression. Musashi didn't just master swordsmanship, he became accomplished in painting, sculpture, poetry, and writing. But this wasn't just diversification for its own sake. He understood that different forms of expression revealed different aspects of the same underlying truth.
When Musashi painted,
Wasn't escaping from his martial training, he was exploring the same principles through a different medium. The focus required for a perfect brushstroke was the same focus required for a perfect sword cut. The patience needed to capture a bird's essence was the same patience needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The sensitivity to subtle changes in ink flow was the same sensitivity needed to read an opponent's intentions. But art offered something that pure martial training couldn't, a way to express the inexpressible. Musashi's paintings weren't just pictures, they were expressions of his internal state, his understanding of nature, his relationship with impermanence. Through art, he could share insights that couldn't be communicated through words or demonstration. This is why artistic expression is such a powerful tool for integration. When you're trying to express something creatively, you're forced to access parts of yourself that remain hidden in purely analytical thinking. You discover connections between ideas that weren't apparent when you were thinking linearly. Find ways to communicate truths that can't be captured in logical arguments. But you don't need to become a professional artist to apply this principle. Any form of creative expression, writing, music, dance, cooking, gardening, cans, serve the same integrative function. The key is approaching it with the same seriousness Musashi brought to his painting. When you're writing, don't just communicate information. Explore what you really think and feel about your subject. When you're cooking, don't just prepare. Food express your care for the people you're feeding. When you're gardening, don't just grow plants. Engage with the cycles of growth and decay that mirror your own development. The goal isn't to create masterpieces. It's to use creative expression as a tool for self-discovery and integration. Through art, you can explore aspects of your experience that remain inaccessible through purely rational analysis. You can communicate insights that can't be captured in logical arguments. You can integrate different aspects of your personality that might otherwise remain fragmented. These 7 principles: integration, presence, ordinariness, mortality, adaptation, teaching, and artistic expression formed the foundation of Musashi's enlightenment. He didn't need gods or gurus because he had something more reliable. A systematic method for transforming every moment into an opportunity for awakening. His temple was his daily practice. His prayer was his complete attention. Salvation was his willingness to be fully alive in whatever he was doing. His enlightenment wasn't a destination he reached, it was a way of traveling that transformed every step of the journey. But perhaps most importantly, Musashi proved that enlightenment isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming completely yourself. He didn't try to fit into existing spiritual categories or follow prescribed paths. Instead, he created his own way by bringing total commitment to his own authentic interests and challenges. This is the path available to you right now. It's not someday when you have more time, not in some future when you're more prepared, but in this moment with whatever you're working on, struggling with, or trying to master. You don't need to abandon your current life to find enlightenment. You need to bring enlightenment to your current life. The entrepreneur who approaches business with Musashi's level of integration and presence is practicing the same path that samurai walked. The parent who brings complete attention to their children is cultivating the same awareness Musashi developed through sword training. The artist who pursues their craft with unwavering dedication is following the same method. That led to Musashi's awakening. The specific domain doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of engagement, the depth of commitment, and the willingness to let the practice transform you rather than trying to use the practice to enhance your existing identity. Musashi's enlightenment wasn't about becoming peaceful or blissful or detached from worldly concerns. It was about becoming completely alive, totally present, and absolutely committed to excellence in whatever he was doing. His spiritual realization was inseparable from his practical mastery. This is perhaps the most important insight for modern seekers. You don't need to choose between spiritual development and worldly success. You don't need to retreat from challenges to find peace. You don't need to abandon your ambitions to discover your true self. Instead, you need to bring such total commitment to your authentic challenges that the distinction between spiritual and mundane dissolves. You need to engage so completely with your actual life that ordinary activities become opportunities for extraordinary realization. The way is in training. Your training is your way. The spreadsheet you're working on, the conversation you're having, the skill you're developing, problem you're solving, these are your teachers. The question isn't whether you have access to the path, it's whether you're willing to recognize the path that's already beneath your feet. Begin where you are, with what you have, and let your complete engagement with life itself become your method for enlightenment. Like Musashi, you don't need to wait for perfect conditions or special circumstances. You don't need exotic practices or ancient wisdom. You just need to bring the same total commitment to your ordinary challenges that the greatest samurai brought to his extraordinary ones. The path is simple, but it's not easy. It requires the courage to engage fully with whatever you're doing, the wisdom to learn from every experience, and the commitment to keep growing regardless of external circumstances. It requires dying to who you were yesterday and being reborn into who you need to become today. But if you're willing to walk this path with the same dedication Musashi brought to his training, you'll discover what he discovered, that enlightenment isn't something you achieve, it's something you express through the quality of your engagement with life itself. The way is in training. Your training begins now.